For the fourth time that week, Kenya, Washington, smelled death in the multi-million-dollar penthouse of Alistair Finch. It wasn't the foul stench of decay, but something far more insidious. It was a faint, cloyingly sweet whisper of almonds, a ghost that clung to the crystal glass of water on his bedside table. The doctors, the specialists, his family, they all saw a powerful man succumbing to stress and a mysterious degenerative illness. They saw weakness. Kenya, the woman who polished his silver and straightened his books, saw a murder in slow motion, and she was the only one who could stop it. The Finch penthouse was a kingdom in the clouds, a glass-walled palace suspended 57 floors above the grimy, beating heart of Chicago. From up here, the city was a silent, glittering circuit board, and the lives of ordinary people were rendered insignificant. It was a perspective Alistair Finch had cultivated his entire life. He was a titan of the logistics industry, a man who had revolutionized global shipping with cold, hard algorithms. His world was one of numbers projections and ruthless efficiency. Feelings were liabilities. People were assets or obstacles. Kenya, Washington, for her part, was an asset. Specifically, she was part of the domestic staff, a ghost in her own right, who moved through the vast, sterile rooms with quiet professionalism. She was 32, with eyes that saw everything, and a past she kept locked away, tighter than the Finch family's vault. 6 years ago, she had been 2 semesters away from finishing her nursing degree at Howard University. Life, however, had thrown a vicious curveball in the form of her parents' fatal car accident, leaving her as the sole guardian of her then 14-year-old brother Jordan. The dream of becoming a registered nurse was shelved, indefinitely replaced by the immediate, crushing need for a steady paycheck. Housekeeping for the ultra-wealthy paid the bills, and just barely Jordan's tuition at the University of Illinois. Kenya was good at her job because she understood the cardinal rule of serving the rich be invisible. She learned the specific way Mr. Finch liked his coffee, black Colombian beans brewed at precisely 198 degrees Fahrenheit. She knew his wife Genevieve, a former art gallery curator, who was now a piece of art herself, preferred her bedsheets to have a thread count of no less than 1,200. She knew their son Nathan, home from his latest sabbatical from a Swiss boarding school, only drank bottled water imported from a specific Norwegian fjord. She saw the cracks in the perfect facade, the faint tremor in Mr. Finch's right hand as he reached for his morning paper, the way he would sometimes pause mid-sentence, his brilliant blue eyes clouding over with a confusion that lasted only a second before his iron will wrestled it back into submission. The increasingly frequent headaches that even his personal physician, the renowned Dr. Aris Thorne, dismissed as a byproduct of stress. The man runs a $10 billion empire, Genevieve Orwart. Kenya had once overheard Dr. Thorne telling Mrs. Finch in the grand foyer, his voice a smooth, condescending baritone. "A little fatigue is to be expected. I've prescribed a stronger vitamin regimen. He just needs to delegate more." Genevieve had nodded her face, a mask of practiced concern. "Of course, Aris, you know best." But Kenya knew better. What she saw wasn't just fatigue. It was a methodical dimming of a great light. And then came the smell. It started a month ago, a faint, almost imperceptible scent in Mr. Finch's private study. She noticed it when she collected his water glass at the end of the day. It was sweet, like bitter almonds or marzipan, but with a sharp chemical undertone that made the hairs on her arms stand up. At first, she thought it was a new brand of cleaning solution used by the night crew, but it was localized entirely to Mr. Finch's personal items. The crystal water glass he drank from all day, the handle of his porcelain teacup, the edge of his heavy silver-plated fountain pen. No one else seemed to notice. The other staff members were too busy, too intimidated. Genevieve floated through the penthouse in a cloud of expensive French perfume that could overpower a chemical fire. Nathan reeked of stale cigarette smoke and teenage angst, and Mr. Finch himself, a man who once had a nose for a bad deal from a mile away, seemed utterly oblivious. One Tuesday afternoon, as she was performing her daily tidying of his study, she saw the detail that transformed a vague suspicion into a cold, hard certainty. The sun, a rare and brilliant thing in the Chicago autumn, slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows, striking the crystal water glass on his desk. As she picked it up, she noticed it, not a smudge, not a fingerprint, but a faint, almost invisible oily residue clinging to the rim right where his lips would touch. It was opalescent, catching the light in a way water never would. She tilted the glass, and the light revealed the same faint sheen on the heavy base of the glass where he would grip it. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't just a smell. It was a substance. She polished the glass with her microfiber cloth until it squeaked her heart, hammering against her ribs. She set it back down, her mind racing. Why the man had more enemies than he had allies. That was the nature of his business. But this was different. This was intimate. Poison wasn't the weapon of a business rival. It was the weapon of a viper coiled right inside the house. That evening, Mr. Finch was working late at his desk. Kenya was tasked with bringing him a light dinner. She entered the study to find him slumped in his high-backed leather chair, staring at the cityscape. The tremor in his hand was more pronounced now, a visible flutter he tried to hide by clenching his fist. "Your dinner, Mr. Finch," she said softly. He turned, and for a moment, the legendary CEO was gone. In his place was a tired, frightened old man. "Thank you, Kenya." His voice was hoarse. He reached for the water glass beside him, the one she had just polished. He lifted it, and she saw the faint, oily sheen was already back on the rim. Her eyes darted around the room. The only things that had been brought in were his documents delivered by his COO, Dominic Russo, and a fresh pot of tea prepared by the kitchen staff. He took a long drink of water. As he set the glass down, a wave of dizziness washed over him. He gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. I'm all right," he rasped, though it was clear he wasn't. Kenya watched her face, a professional blank mask, but inside a silent scream was building. Everyone saw a man failing. She saw a man being executed, one sip at a time. And the executioner was watching, waiting, hidden in plain sight. The discovery of the oily residue shifted something in Kenya. Her quiet observance sharpened into a focused, clandestine investigation. Her work, once a monotonous series of tasks, became a hunt for clues. Every polished surface, every discarded napkin, every overheard conversation was a potential piece of a puzzle she felt she was assembling in the dark. Her first area of focus was opportunity. Who had consistent, unsupervised access to the personal items Mr. Finch used daily? The list was disturbingly short and comprised of people who were meant to be his most trusted circle. There was Genevieve, his wife, of 15 years. She personally laid out his vitamin regimen each morning in a small mother-of-pearl dish. She often brought him his first cup of coffee. Their relationship from Kenya's vantage point was one of cool, transactional affection. Genevieve managed the social calendar that cemented his status, and in return, she lived a life of unimaginable luxury. But lately, Kenya had noticed a new tension in her. One afternoon, while dusting a credenza in the hallway, Kenya heard Genevieve's voice, low and sharp, coming from the master bedroom. "Not enough. You don't understand the pressure I'm under," Genevieve hissed into her phone. A pause. No, he suspects nothing. He thinks it's the stress of the business. Just get it done. The price is irrelevant. Kenya froze her hand, hovering over a porcelain figurine. Who was she talking to? What price was irrelevant? The conversation ended abruptly as Genevieve's bedroom door opened. She swept past Kenya without a glance, her jaw set, leaving the scent of Chanel and conspiracy in her wake. Then there was Dominic Russo, Mr. Finch's chief operating officer, a shark in a perfectly tailored Italian suit. Dominic was ambitious, brilliant, and utterly ruthless, a younger, hungrier version of Mr. Finch himself. He was the only non-family member who could enter the penthouse without being announced. He often worked late with Mr. Finch in the study, poring over documents. If Mr. Finch were to be incapacitated, or worse, Dominic, as his designated successor in the company's bylaws, would ascend to the throne. Kenya watched him carefully. He had a habit of gesturing expansively, his hands slicing the air as he made a point. But around Mr. Finch's personal space, he was strangely meticulous. He would never touch Mr. Finch's desk, never move a paper. It could have been respect, but to Kenya, it looked like a man being extremely careful not to leave fingerprints at a crime scene. He was always the one bringing the final signed copies of documents for Mr. Finch to review documents. Mr. Finch would read while sipping his water and fiddling with his pen. And there was Nathan, the prodigal son. He drifted through the penthouse like a phantom, his relationship with his father, a cold war of disappointed sighs and resentful silences. Nathan had recently been cut off financially after racking up a significant debt, the nature of which was a topic of hushed gossip among the staff. A gambling problem, some said. Something worse, others whispered. He needed money desperately. A frail, declining father might be more susceptible to persuasion, or a dead father would solve his problems permanently through a massive inheritance. Kenya often found Nathan lurking near the study, not entering, just watching his expression, a toxic cocktail of bitterness and longing. Kenya's nursing background, long dormant, began to stir. She recalled lectures on toxicology. The almond smell was a classic, albeit often misleading indicator of cyanide, but cyanide poisoning was rapid, violent. This was slow, insidious, a gradual erosion. This was something else. A neurotoxin, perhaps. Something that attacked the central nervous system over time, mimicking the symptoms of a stroke or a neurological disorder. One evening after her shift, she didn't go straight home to the small apartment she shared with Jordan. Instead, she went to the Harold Washington Library. Surrounded by the comforting silence of books, she sat at a public computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She typed in search terms, slow-acting poisons, neurotoxins absorbed through skin, symptoms of gradual neurological decline, poisons with almond scent. Hours passed. She waded through medical journals and declassified government documents on chemical agents. Then she found it. A small, obscure article on a class of compounds known as organophosphates, specifically a customized, less volatile variant. They could be engineered to be absorbed transdermally through the skin. Chronic low-dose exposure would lead to symptoms that were maddeningly vague and easily misdiagnosed: muscle tremors, headaches, cognitive fog, fatigue, and eventually respiratory failure or cardiac arrest. The article mentioned that some variants, when suspended in an oil-based medium, could have a faint, sweet, marzipan-like odor. The screen blurred in front of her. It wasn't the water he was drinking. It was what he was touching. The glass, the teacup, the pen. The substance was being applied to the surfaces he handled, most absorbed into his bloodstream, through his hands, his lips. This was a level of cold, calculating patience that was truly terrifying. The next day, armed with this new, horrifying knowledge, Kenya felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. She was cleaning the ensuite bathroom connected to the study when Dr. Thorne arrived for a scheduled checkup. She could hear their voices clearly through the slightly ajar door. "The tremors are worse, Aris," Mr. Finch said, his voice strained. "And yesterday, I couldn't remember Dominic's last name for a full minute. I was looking right at him. Alistair, we've been over this." Dr. Thorne's voice was placating, the tone one uses with a difficult child. "Your scans are clear. Your blood work is, for a man your age, under your level of pressure, exemplary. This is your body telling you to slow down. I've told you, I can prescribe a mild sedative." "I don't need a sedative. I need answers." Mr. Finch roared a flash of his old, formidable self. "Something is wrong with me. What's wrong is that you refuse to accept you're not 30 years old anymore," Dr. Thorne said smoothly. "Stress can manifest in terrifyingly physical ways. Let's not chase phantom zebras when we're surrounded by horses." Kenya leaned against the cool marble wall, her eyes closed. A doctor, one of the best in the city, was standing feet away from a poisoned man and telling him it was all in his head. The misdiagnosis wasn't just a mistake. It was an accomplice. It was providing the perfect cover for the murderer. She knew then that she couldn't rely on anyone. The family was compromised, the doctor was blind, and the COO stood to gain everything. She, the invisible maid, was Alistair Finch's only hope. And if she made one wrong move, she wouldn't just lose her job. She could very well lose her life. The burden of knowledge was a physical weight. Kenya felt it in the tightening of her shoulders, the constant, low-level hum of anxiety in her stomach. Every time she saw Mr. Finch struggle to sign his name, every time his voice faltered, it was a fresh torment. She knew she had to say something. The silence was becoming a form of complicity. But how could a housekeeper, a woman they barely registered as a person, accuse a member of this powerful family of attempted murder based on a smell and a half-remembered toxicology lecture? She decided to start small to test the waters. Her target was Mrs. Gable, the executive housekeeper. A stern, meticulously organized woman in her late 50s, Mrs. Gable had run the Finch household for 2 decades. She was fiercely loyal and operated with the precision of a drill sergeant. If anyone could navigate the treacherous internal politics of the penthouse, it was her. Kenya found her in the staff linen closet, counting Egyptian cotton towels. "Mrs. Gable," Kenya began, her voice softer than she intended. "Yes, Kenya. Is there a problem with the West Wing suite?" Mrs. Gable didn't look up from her clipboard. "No, ma'am. It's about Mr. Finch." This got her attention. Mrs. Gable's head snapped up, her sharp eyes narrowing. "What about him?" "I'm worried about him. He seems unwell. More than just stress, I think. I've noticed a strange smell on his glassware in his study." Kenya's heart was pounding. She was trying to sound like a concerned employee, not a conspiracy theorist. "And there's sometimes a residue on the glass." Mrs. Gable set her clipboard down with a deliberate, sharp rap. She took a step closer, invading Kenya's personal space. Her voice was low and cold, a winter wind. "Kenya, let me give you a piece of advice. You are paid to clean this home. You are not paid to worry, to think, or to notice. Your observations are not required. Mr. Finch's health is the concern of his family and his very expensive, very capable doctor. Do you think a man like Dr. Thorne would miss something that a cleaning girl could spot?" The words "cleaning girl" landed like a slap. Kenya felt a hot flush of shame and anger rise in her cheeks. "I just thought—" "You thought wrong." Mrs. Gable cut her off. "You are overstepping your position. Wild fantasies will not be tolerated. If I hear another word of this from you or anyone you speak to, you will be dismissed without severance or reference. Do I make myself perfectly crystal clear?" "Yes, Mrs. Gable Questo." Kenya mumbled, her eyes fixed on the floor. The door hadn't just been closed, it had been slammed and bolted in her face. The rejection stung, but it also solidified her resolve. Mrs. Gable wasn't just dismissing her, she was actively protecting the status quo. Whether out of blind loyalty or fear, she was another obstacle. Kenya realized she had to go higher. It was a terrifying prospect, but the alternative, watching a man die, was unthinkable. Her next chance came 2 days later. Mr. Finch had a rare day, working from home entirely, and Genevieve was hosting a luncheon for a local museum charity. Kenya was serving drinks. She saw her opening when Genevieve stepped away from her guests to take a call in the solarium. Taking a deep breath, Kenya followed, holding a tray with a fresh glass of iced tea as her excuse. "Mrs. Finch, I'm sorry to interrupt." Genevieve turned her phone pressed to her ear. She held up a perfectly manicured finger, finishing her call. "It's handled. Goodbye." She snapped her phone shut and turned her cool gaze on Kenya. "What is it?" "Ma'am, I have a serious concern about Mr. Finch's health." Genevieve's eyebrows arched. "You and Mrs. Gable both. She mentioned you had some imaginative ideas. I trust she's already addressed this with you." Kenya's stomach dropped. Mrs. Gable had reported her. Of course she had. "She did, but ma'am, with all due respect, I was a nursing student. I recognize symptoms that Dr. Thorne seems to be overlooking. The tremors, the cognitive lapses, combined with a very specific smell." "A smell?" Genevieve's voice was laced with derision. "You want to contradict a diagnosis from one of the country's leading physicians because of a smell. It's the smell of a specific type of poison." Kenya said the words, tumbling out before she could stop them. "A neurotoxin. I believe someone is intentionally harming your husband." The change in Genevieve's demeanor was instantaneous and frightening. The mask of polite society fell away, replaced by a glacial fury. She took a step forward, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Listen to me very carefully, you little fool. My husband is under immense pressure. He is unwell. What he needs is peace and quiet, not the hysterical ramblings of the help. You are a maid. Do you have any idea what would happen if a rumor like this got out? The stock would plummet. Our lives would be destroyed by tabloids. It would ruin him." She gestured around the magnificent solarium. "It would ruin all of this. But his life is being managed," Genevieve snapped. "By me, by his doctor, by people who know what they're doing. You, on the other hand, are one more baseless accusation away from being thrown out of here so fast your head will spin. And believe me, I will personally see to it that you never work in this city again, not even scrubbing toilets in a bus station. Your brother, Jordan, isn't it, at U of I? It would be a shame if his tuition funding suddenly evaporated." The threat was clear, brutal, and utterly effective. It was a shot aimed directly at Kenya's most vulnerable point. Jordan was everything to her. The thought of his future being destroyed because of her actions sent a wave of icy fear through her. She stood there speechless and shaking as Genevieve composed herself, smoothing her silk dress. "We are done here," Genevieve said, her voice, once again calm and controlled. She took the iced tea from Kenya's trembling hand. "Go back to your duties, and remember your place." As Genevieve walked away, rejoining her friends with a dazzling smile, Kenya felt utterly alone. She was trapped. She had tried to go through the proper channels, and in return she had been threatened and humiliated. They weren't just ignoring the problem, they were actively suppressing it. The conclusion was as horrifying as it was inescapable. One of them was the poisoner, and the others were the walls of the prison ensuring the victim could not be saved. She couldn't trust anyone. If she was going to save Alistair Finch, she would have to find undeniable proof, and she would have to do it all by herself. Defiance is a fire that burns brightest when the winds of opposition blow hardest. Genevieve Finch's threat intended to crush Kenya instead forged her fear into a diamond-hard resolve. They had called her a cleaning girl, a nobody. They thought they could silence her. They were wrong. If they wouldn't listen to her words, she would have to give them something they couldn't ignore, cold, hard proof. Her investigation transformed. It was no longer about observation. It was about acquisition. She needed a sample of the substance. The penthouse, once a workplace, now became a strategic battlefield. Kenya mapped it in her mind, the locations of the security cameras, with their sweeping, cycloptic gazes. The patrol schedule of the overnight security guard, a portly man named George, who was always engrossed in a paperback thriller by 1:00 a.m. The blind spots in the hallways. Her cleaning cart, once a simple tool of her trade, became her mobile operations center. Tucked away beneath microfiber cloths and bottles of glass cleaner were small, sterile cotton swabs she'd bought from a pharmacy, sealed in a Ziploc bag, and a pair of disposable latex gloves. Her target was the silver fountain pen. It was Mr. Finch's favorite, a gift from his late father. He used it constantly, for signing documents, for jotting notes, for chewing on when deep in thought. It was always on his desk, and it was always coated in that faint, invisible poison. It was the most consistent delivery system. Getting to it would be a challenge. Mr. Finch's study was his sanctuary and was considered off-limits after he retired for the evening. A silent alarm was set on the door at 11:00 p.m. That gave her a window, but it was a narrow one. For 3 nights she watched and waited, cleaning nearby rooms, listening to the rhythm of the household as it settled into slumber. She tracked the movements of the other late-shift staff, noting who went where and when. She learned that Mrs. Finch took a sleeping pill at 10:30 p.m. and was never seen again until morning. Nathan often slipped out around midnight, reeking of cologne, not to return until the early hours. The penthouse was a house of ghosts, each haunting their own separate spaces. On the 4th night she made her move. It was just after 10:45 p.m. Mr. Finch had retired early, complaining of a splitting headache. The house was quiet. Her heart felt like a trapped bird beating against her ribs. She pushed her cart down the long marble hallway toward the study, the soft squeak of its wheels sounding like a roar in the silence. The hallway was a gallery of modern art, the abstract sculptures casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and reach for her. She reached the massive oak doors of the study. She pulled on the latex gloves, her hands slick with nervous sweat. She didn't have a key, but she knew from her duties that the latch didn't always catch if you didn't pull it shut with force. Mr. Finch, in his weary state, often just pushed it closed. She held her breath and gently pushed on the door. It swung inward with a barely audible sigh. Success. She slipped inside, leaving her cart in the hallway, as if she were about to clean. The room was dark, save for the ambient glow of the city lights pouring through the window wall, striping the expensive carpet with silver. The air was thick with the scent of old leather paper and that faint, sweet almond smell. It was stronger here. Her eyes went straight to the desk. The pen lay there, gleaming in the moonlight next to a stack of papers and the crystal water glass. She moved quickly, her rubber-soled shoes making no sound. She pulled a sterile swab from her pocket. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. Steady, Kenya. Steady. Jordan's future is on the line. A man's life is on the line. She carefully, meticulously ran the cotton swab over the grooved grip of the pen, then around the base where he would hold it. She could see the faint, oily sheen transfer to the white cotton fibers. She did the same with a second swab around the rim of the water glass. She sealed each swab in its own small labeled plastic baggie, her breath held tight in her chest. She had the evidence. Now what? She couldn't take it to the police. A maid with a wild story and 2 cotton swabs, they'd laugh her out of the precinct and call the Finches to report their delusional employee. She needed to know what it was. She needed a lab. Getting a sample tested anonymously was nearly impossible and astronomically expensive. Her mind raced back to her university days. There was a toxicology lab at the university, mostly for academic research. Getting an unofficial test done would be difficult, but not impossible if you knew someone. She remembered a classmate, Timothy Cho. He had been a chemistry whiz, a lovable nerd who had always been a lab assistant. They weren't close friends, but they had been in the same study group for a brutal organic chemistry class. A quick search on social media confirmed it. Dr. Timothy Cho, now a postdoctoral research fellow at his alma mater in the exact same department. The next day, her day off, she took the L train south, the Ziploc bags tucked securely in an inside pocket of her jacket. The university campus felt like a different world a lifetime away. It was filled with the sounds of hope and possibility she had been forced to leave behind. She found Tim in a cluttered lab that smelled of ozone and reagents. He was older with a wedding ring on his finger and glasses perched on his nose, but he had the same kind, intelligent eyes. He was surprised to see her, but his smile was genuine. Kenya Washington. Wow, blast from the past. What are you doing here? She couldn't tell him the whole truth. It was too insane, too dangerous, so she told him a version of it. Tim, I need a huge favor, and I need you to be discreet. She began, her voice low and earnest. My brother has a friend who works in an industrial cleaning facility. He's been getting sick and the company is stonewalling him. He thinks he's being exposed to something, a chemical, but he can't afford a lawyer or a private lab. I managed to get a couple of surface samples. She pulled out the bags. I was hoping, I know it's a lot to ask. Could you run these through a gas chromatograph? Just a preliminary analysis, I can pay you. Tim looked from her worried face to the swabs. He was a scientist, and at the heart of every scientist is a deep-seated curiosity. Unofficially off the books. Completely, she said, her gaze pleading. He hesitated for a long moment, chewing on his lip. It was against every rule. He could lose his position, but he saw the desperation in her eyes, the same desperation he used to see before a major exam. All right, he said, finally letting out a sigh. For old time's sake. But this never happened. I'll have to run it late tonight, after hours. Give me your number. I'll text you when I have something. Might be a day or two. Relief washed over Kenya so powerfully, her knees felt weak. Thank you, Tim. You have no idea what this means. As she left the lab and walked back across the sun-dappled quad, she felt the first glimmer of hope. She had taken a massive risk, but she had evidence, and soon she would have a name for the poison. She was no longer just an observer. She was a hunter now, and she was closing in on her prey. The next 48 hours were an exercise in exquisite torture. Every buzz of her phone sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. At the penthouse, she performed her duties with an outward calm that felt like a betrayal of the storm raging within her. She watched the 3 main suspects, Genevieve, Dominic, and Nathan, with a new analytical eye. Every gesture, every word seemed laden with potential guilt. Genevieve was on the phone constantly, her conversations short, and clipped her face a mask of anxiety. Was she arranging a secret rendezvous, or just ordering catering? Dominic Rousseau presented Mr. Finch with a new complex merger proposal that would consolidate his own power within the company. Was it a shrewd business move or a strategic preparation for a takeover? Nathan had a blazing row with his father over money, ending with him storming out of the penthouse, shouting that his father would regret this. Was it the empty threat of a spoiled child or something more sinister? They were all plausible. They all had motive. The text from Tim came late on the second night, just as she was getting ready for bed. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, and she snatched it up, her hands trembling. "Got your results. It's bad. Call me." Her heart pounded in her ears as she dialed his number. He picked up on the first ring. "Tim, what is it?" "Kenya, where did you get these samples?" His voice was stripped of all its earlier warmth. It was the cold, flat tone of a scientist looking at something horrifying. "This isn't an industrial cleaner. This is a custom-synthesized acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. It's a military-grade nerve agent, chemically similar to VX, but modified to have a slower onset and to be more stable in an oil-based medium." Kenya sank onto her bed, the world tilting on its axis. "In English, Tim. In English, it's one of the most sophisticated and deadly poisons I've ever seen. It works by disrupting the nervous system. The low-dose transdermal exposure you're describing, it's diabolical. It perfectly mimics a gradual neurological collapse. The almond smell is a byproduct of the stabilizing compound. This wasn't made in a basement lab, Kenya. This is the work of a highly skilled organic chemist. This is state-of-the-art." He paused, and she could hear him take a deep breath. "Whoever your brother's friend is, he's not just dealing with an unsafe workplace. Someone is trying to murder him in the most meticulous way imaginable." The words hung in the air between them. Meticulous, sophisticated. Kenya ended the call, her mind a whirlwind. A custom-synthesized military-grade nerve agent. This changed everything. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a greedy wife or an angry son acting impulsively. This was the work of a professional, someone with access to incredible resources and scientific knowledge. It required a level of planning and precision that seemed beyond Genevieve's panicked scheming or Nathan's chaotic desperation. Dominic Rousseau was ruthless, but was he a chemist? Her mind sifted through the cast of characters, the faces that populated the Finch penthouse. And then a new face swam into focus. Someone she'd seen 100 times but never truly looked at. Someone who existed in the background, a piece of the furniture utterly unremarkable. Brendan Cole, Mr. Finch's personal assistant. Brendan was in his late 20s with a quiet, deferential demeanor, mousy brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses. His official job was to manage Mr. Finch's schedule, screen his calls, and prepare his documents. He was the epitome of quiet efficiency. He was so self-effacing, so utterly bland, that he had never even registered on Kenya's list of suspects. He was just Brendan. But now she saw him through a new lens. Brendan was the one who managed the flow of items to Mr. Finch's desk. He laid out the files, he filled the inkwell for the fountain pen, he ensured the water carafe was always full. He had the most consistent, unquestioned access of anyone, and he was always meticulously arranging the desk, polishing the pen, wiping down the water glass. Actions that seemed like diligent service could in fact be the methodical application of poison. The next morning, Kenya watched him like a hawk. She saw him enter the study ahead of Mr. Finch to prepare the desk for the day. He wore thin, disposable latex gloves, which wasn't unusual for an assistant handling important documents. But as he adjusted the blotter, the cuff of his shirt rode up his wrist for a split second. On the pale skin of his inner wrist, Kenya saw it, a patch of red, irritated skin. A small, angry-looking chemical burn, precisely the kind one might get from an accidental splash of a caustic substance. A contact dermatitis rash. Her blood turned to ice. It was a tiny detail, a fleeting imperfection in his otherwise flawless presentation, but it screamed at her. She needed to know more about him. Who was Brendan Cole? That afternoon, while the family was out, she took another monumental risk. Knowing Brendan was in a meeting downtown with the legal team, she let herself into the small Spartan office he used just off the main foyer. It was neat to the point of being sterile. There was nothing personal on the desk, no photos, no trinkets. It was the office of a man who didn't exist outside of his job. She started with his wastebasket. Beneath crumpled papers and receipts, her fingers brushed against a small, waxy piece of paper. It was a pharmacy receipt. She smoothed it out. It was from a specialty chemical supply pharmacy across town. The prescription was for a topical corticosteroid cream, the kind used to treat severe skin inflammation and chemical burns. The patient's name was Brendan Cole. Her breath hitched. She dug deeper. At the very bottom, she found a heavily creased folded piece of paper. It wasn't a recent document. The paper was yellowed and soft with age. She unfolded it carefully. It was a newspaper clipping from a local Cleveland paper, dated over 20 years ago. The headline read, "Falcon Steel Collapses. CEO Finch acquitted of wrongdoing as thousands lose jobs pensions." The article detailed a brutal hostile takeover. A company called Falcon Steel had been acquired and then dismantled by Alistair Finch's corporation in one of his earliest, most ruthless deals. The company's founder, a man named Robert Koloszewski, had lost everything. The article mentioned he had a wife and a young son. A few months after the collapse, Robert Koloszewski had taken his own life. Kenya's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and did a quick search, Robert Koloszewski's son. The results loaded, and the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with sickening finality. Robert Koloszewski had one child, a son named Brendan Koloszewski. He had changed his last name to his mother's maiden name, Cole. It wasn't about money or a corporate takeover. It was about revenge. A cold, patient, brilliantly executed revenge that had been 20 years in the making. Brendan had worked his way into his enemy's inner sanctum, made himself indispensable and invisible all, while slowly, methodically, and brilliantly poisoning the man who had destroyed his father. He wasn't just trying to kill Alistair Finch. He was dismantling him, just as Finch had dismantled his father's company piece by agonizing peace. The revelation hit Kenya with the force of a physical blow. She stood in Brendan's sterile office, the old newspaper clipping trembling in her hand, the entire sordid, tragic story laid bare. This wasn't just an attempted murder. It was a ghost story, a long simmering vendetta reaching its final deadly chapter. Her fear was now eclipsed by a frantic, heart-pounding urgency. Brendan wasn't just poisoning Mr. Finch, he was bringing his plan to a crescendo. The merger Dominic Russo had been pushing for was the biggest deal of Finch's career. The final signing was scheduled for tomorrow morning in the main boardroom of the penthouse. It would be Finch's crowning achievement, the final validation of his entire ruthless ethos. Kenya knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that Brendan would not allow that to happen. He wouldn't let Alistair Finch have that final victory. The signing ceremony would be the grand finale of his revenge. He would likely use a final massive dose, enough to cause a fatal heart attack or stroke right at the moment of his triumph. It would be seen as the tragic, final toll of a stressful life. The perfect, poetic, and utterly untraceable murder. She had to stop it. She spent a sleepless night, her mind racing through impossible scenarios. Going to the police was still a non-starter. The quiet PA is secretly the vengeful son of a man your boss bankrupted 2 decades ago, and he's poisoning him with a custom nerve agent, and my proof is a rash on his wrist and a 20-year-old newspaper clipping. They would think she was insane. Telling the family was out. Genevieve had already threatened her into silence. Dominic Russo would see it as a ploy and have her thrown out. No, she couldn't stop it from the outside. She had to stop it from the inside, in the moment. The next morning, the penthouse buzzed with an electric tension. Lawyers in sharp suits arrived, their briefcases clicking shut with an air of finality. Caterers set up a lavish spread of food and champagne for the post-signing celebration. Genevieve was a vision in a powder blue suit, playing the role of the proud, supportive wife. Dominic Russo was practically vibrating with ambition, his smile sharp and predatory. Mr. Finch looked terrible. His face was pale and drawn with dark circles under his eyes. He moved slowly, leaning on a cane Kenya had never seen him use before. But his eyes held a spark of the old fire, a fierce determination to see this deal through. Kenya watched Brendan. He was a portrait of calm efficiency, gliding through the chaos, directing staff, checking connections for the video conference, and most importantly, preparing the boardroom. She saw him walk to the head of the massive mahogany table where Mr. Finch would sit. With a gloved hand, he took out the gleaming silver fountain pen and placed it perfectly parallel to a stack of signature pages. He gave it a final gentle polish with a soft cloth. Kenya felt a wave of nausea. He was loading the weapon in plain sight. She was assigned to beverage service for the meeting. It was her only way in. Her uniform felt tight and restrictive. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She loaded a serving tray with a crystal carafe of water and a dozen glasses. The tray felt impossibly heavy, her hands slick with sweat. The meeting began. The room was packed. Lawyers, executives, and Finch himself sat at the table. Brendan stood discreetly against the wall, a silent observer, his face a neutral mask. Kenya stood by the service station, waiting, watching. The lawyers droned on, reading the final clauses. The tension mounted. Finally, the lead counsel slid the signature pages in front of Alistair Finch. Alistair, if you would. This was it. The moment of triumph. The moment of death. Mr. Finch nodded, a weary smile on his face. He reached for the silver pen. His trembling hand closed around it. Time seemed to slow down. Kenya saw the slight pressure of his fingers on the pen, the poison beginning to seep into his skin. She saw Brendan's eyes, and for a fraction of a second, his mask of indifference slipped. A flicker of dark, triumphant satisfaction lit his gaze. Kenya moved. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a primal, instinctual act of intervention. She lurched forward from the service station, her body clumsy, her face a mask of faux panic. "Oh my goodness!" She cried out, her voice high and unnatural. She tripped on the edge of the plush Persian rug, sending her body hurtling towards the table. The heavy silver tray flew from her hands. The result was a symphony of destruction. The crystal carafe hit the mahogany table and exploded, sending a tidal wave of ice-cold water surging across the polished surface. It soaked the multi-million-dollar signature pages, turning the precise legal ink into running, blurry rivers of blue. Glasses shattered. The executives leaped back with shouts of surprise and anger. And in the chaos, Kenya's flailing hand shot out and knocked the silver pen from Mr. Finch's grasp. It flew through the air, clattering onto the floor, where it rolled under the heavy credenza against the wall. Pandemonium erupted. "What is the meaning of this?" Dominic Russo bellowed, his face purple with rage. "You clumsy fool!" Genevieve shrieked from the doorway. Alistair Finch stared, stunned, at the ruined documents, his life's work dissolving into a puddle of water before his eyes. His face, already pale, turned ashen with fury. "Security! Get her out of here! You're fired!" he roared, pointing a trembling finger at Kenya. Security guards rushed in, grabbing Kenya's arms. But she didn't struggle. Amid the shouting and the chaos, her eyes were locked on one person, Brendan Cole. For a moment, as he looked at the ruined signing and the lost pen, his bland, forgettable face was contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. It was the face of a man whose life's purpose had just been snatched away from him at the final second. He saw Kenya looking at him, and in that moment he knew that she knew. The mask was gone forever. "It was the pen," Kenya said, her voice clear and steady above the din directed at Alistair Finch. "He's been poisoning you with the pen." She nodded her head towards the pale, horror-struck face of Brendan Cole. The room fell into a stunned silence. Everyone turned to look from the hysterical maid to the meek personal assistant, and the world held its breath. The boardroom was a frozen tableau of shock and confusion. Alistair Finch, his face a thunderous mask of rage, stared at Kenya as if she had lost her mind. The two security guards held her arms tightly, ready to drag her away. Dominic Russo was already on his phone, likely calling building security to have her arrested. "What nonsense is this?" Finch snarled, his voice weak but still commanding. "You ruined the most important deal of my life, and now you're spouting insane accusations. It's not nonsense," Kenya said, her voice shaking but firm. She ignored the guards, her gaze fixed on the powerful man she had just saved. "For weeks I've watched you get weaker. I've smelled the chemical on your things. I had it tested." She didn't know if Tim's results would hold up in court, but it was a gamble she had to take. "Tested?" "You had what tested?" Dominic scoffed, lowering his phone. "This is preposterous." "I took a sample from his fountain pen. It's a custom-made organophosphate nerve agent. It's absorbed through the skin." Kenya said, the technical terms falling from her lips with clinical precision. "It causes progressive neurological symptoms, tremors, cognitive fog, headaches, eventually cardiac failure. It perfectly mimics a natural decline from stress." A hush fell over the room. The lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. This was not the babbling of a clumsy maid. This was the language of science. Kenya turned her head and pinned Brendan with her gaze. "His real name is Brendan Kolashevsky. His father was Robert Kolashevsky, the founder of Falcon Steel. You destroyed his company and his family 20 years ago. This has all been for him." The color drained from Brendan's face. His carefully constructed world, his 2-decade-long quest for vengeance, had crumbled into dust in 30 seconds. His eyes, wide with panic and hatred, darted towards the door. Alistair Finch staggered back as if he'd been shot. The name Falcon Steel was a ghost from his past, a brutal chapter he had long since buried. He stared at his quiet, efficient assistant, and for the first time he truly saw the man who had been standing by his side for 5 years. He saw the flicker of his father's features in the young man's face. The lie he had told himself for years, that business was just business, that there were no real casualties, crumbled around him. "Brendan." Finch whispered the name, a question filled with dawning horror. That was all it took. Brendan lunged for the door, but the head of Finch's security detail, a former police officer named Frank, was faster. He blocked Brendan's path, and the fight was over before it began. Brendan crumpled all the years of patient, coiled rage, dissolving into pathetic, sobbing defeat. "He took everything from us." Brendan wept as he was restrained. "He killed my father, just as surely as if he'd pulled the trigger himself. He deserved to die. He deserved to feel what it was like to lose everything slowly." In the aftermath, the chaos was absolute. The police were called. The boardroom was declared a crime scene. The spilled water, the ruined documents, and most importantly, the silver pen, which was retrieved from under the credenza, became evidence. Preliminary tests on the pen confirmed the presence of a highly toxic, unidentifiable chemical agent. Brendan Kolashevsky, under questioning, gave a full and chilling confession detailing his long and patient plot for revenge, from changing his name to studying chemistry to methodically poisoning the man who haunted his life. Alistair Finch was rushed to the hospital, where toxicology reports confirmed he had been subjected to chronic nerve agent poisoning. The doctors were stunned. They told him that the final massive dose Brendan had planned for the signing would have been instantly fatal. Kenya's dramatic, chaotic intervention hadn't just saved a business deal. It had saved his life. A week later, Kenya was summoned back to the penthouse. She walked in, not as a maid, but as a guest. Alistair Finch was waiting for her in his study. He was paler, thinner, and the tremor in his hand was still present, a permanent souvenir from his ordeal. But his eyes were clear for the first time in months. The fog had lifted. "They tell me the damage is mostly reversible with time and aggressive treatment," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual arrogance. "The man I was a week ago would have died. You saved my life, Kenya." "I just did what was right," she said simply. "No," he corrected her, shaking his head. "You did what was impossible. You saw what experts missed. You spoke up when everyone tried to silence you. You risked everything." He gestured to a chair. "Please sit." He slid a heavy envelope across the desk towards her. "This is a check. It will cover Jordan's tuition for any school he chooses, for as long as he chooses. It will buy you a house. It will ensure you never have to worry about money again." Kenya looked at the envelope, but didn't reach for it. Finch smiled, a tired, knowing smile. "I figured as much. Money isn't what drives you. You're a nurse who never got to be a nurse, a scientist without a lab." He slid a second, slimmer envelope next to the first. "That is an offer. I'm starting a new charitable foundation dedicated to biotech research and funding medical education for underprivileged students. I want you to help me run it. And the foundation's first scholarship, a full ride to the medical school of your choice, with all living expenses paid, is yours. No strings attached. You can finally finish what you started." This time, tears welled in Kenya's eyes. It wasn't just a reward. It was a restoration. It was the return of a dream she thought had died years ago. She took the second envelope. "Thank you, Mr. Finch." "No," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Miss Washington." In that moment, she was no longer the invisible maid. She was a woman who had looked into the heart of a gilded cage and seen the truth that everyone else had missed. She hadn't just saved a life. She had reclaimed her own. Kenya Washington's story is a powerful reminder that wisdom, courage, and perception are not confined to boardrooms or executive suites. They can be found in the quietest corners and in the most overlooked people. She proved that one person armed with the truth and the bravery to speak it can change everything. While everyone else saw a failing CEO, she saw a victim. While they saw a maid, a powerful man saw a savior. Her journey from cleaning Jordan's room to cleaning up a corporate conspiracy shows us that your current position never defines your potential. It's a testament to the idea that sometimes the person who pays the closest attention is the most powerful person in the room. If this story of courage and intellect moved you, please take a moment to hit the like button and share it with someone who appreciates a story where the underdog comes out on top. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas and incredible stories you won't want to miss. Click that bell icon so you're always notified. Thank you for listening.